Hey, what's going on, guys? This will be the first of what I hope will be several top matches lists of certain guys. Today I will be doing Takayama Yoshihiro, one of the best, if not the best, big men workers in the history of the business. If you have any suggestions of who else you would like me to immortalize with a list, then please do suggest it to me. So, Takayama. It's probably a stretch to call him one of the greatest of all time because he just didn't have too many great years. I mean, he was largely a mid-carder wherever he went during the 1990s, and he became a top-level guy when Noah was established at the turn of the century. And then his best work, without a doubt, came from 2002 to 2004, when he was already in his mid-30s. You know, these days he can still put out a performance that's charismatic, memorable, and violent, most certainly. It's just not the same as 2002, when you could very easily make the case that he was the best wrestler, at least in Japan, possibly even the world. You know, that's not to say I thought all the matches that are recommended from that period lived up to the hype necessarily. I didn't see any that were bad. Some just seemed to be more loved by others than by me. Probably the biggest one of those was the G1 Climax 2002 final between Takayama and Shono. So keep that in mind. This is just my list and my list alone, and by all means investigate further if you like what you see. I have two honourable mentions that didn't make the top 10, but I still thought they were good enough that they needed to be mentioned. The first will take us to 2002, the 7th of June, to New Japan Pro Wrestling, when it was Takayama versus Nakanishi Manabu. This match is fun because, contrary to what you might expect, there aren't that many matches, at least that I've seen, where someone tries to outmatch Takayama on his signature moves, and that becomes the charm of the match. This is what makes Nakanishi's underdog performance a memorable sight to see. This is a match of German suplex versus German suplex. They trade high kicks, there's chops versus knees, all those sorts of things, and it's really, really good. You know, if they didn't have that dynamic with the signature moves, this would have been an underdog story that just wouldn't have stood out from all the others that are like it. You know, but Nakanishi brings it with the signatures, and the match is memorable because of it, I thought. So that deserves an honorable mention. That is from 2002 in New Japan. The second honorable mention takes us to Pro Wrestling 01 in 2007, where it was a six-man tag, Takayama teaming up with Sato Kohei and Yokoi Hirotaka versus Omori Takao, Murakami Kazunari, and Otani Shinjiro. This match, it's the sort of thing that I'll either like or dislike, and it's pretty hard to explain why, because it's very, very disjointed. You know, all the segments of the match, they go by very quickly and nothing really sinks in. You know, one moment you'll have Takayama throwing his weight around, and then there'll be a tag and the focus will have changed completely. Now you'll have two equals in there going with MMA gloves throwing punches at each other. But the match worked for me because the individual segments were engaging enough for the match to always be interesting. You know, you're wondering at times whether what you're seeing is a good package of stuff, but it's always interesting. That's what I would say about it. You know, I reacted much in the same way to Hidaka versus Ito from 01 this year, which is on my match of the year list for 2011. And the match gets on Takayama list because every time he's in there, he asserts himself as the leader of his team because he's the biggest guy around. And it does get violence, but it's only a taster for what we would see later on. So that deserves a mention. That is Pro Wrestling 01 from 2007. So let's start with the top 10, starting with the 10th match on my list, which is a match that happened in 01 a month after the previous one. Takayama and Sato versus Omori and Otani. This one follows logic a bit more than the previous one, so it's not as interesting in some parts, but it does feature a vastly superior Takayama performance, which is why it gets placed above the other 01 match and sneaks into the top 10. But when I said follow logic, people might get the idea that I'm thinking of this as a strategically sound contest. It's not really. It's a fight. It's a brawl, it's violent as can be, and not in any way intellectually stimulating, but it is a lot of fun. You know, Takayama gets thrown from the dominant position through brawling, weapons, and he's a mess by the end. It's an amazing spectacle that I recommend everyone should watch. There are a few matches that are not good because they manage to just completely demolished the amazing boulder that is Takayama. So this one is one of the finest examples of that, I would say. Then we get to 9th place, where I put Takayama versus Sugiura Takashi for the GHC Heavyweight Championship from Noah last year. The biggest obstacle to overcome here is the crowd. I'm not going to lie, the crowd is really bad and it does hurt the match. But once you get past that, you're going to see an epic fight. I mean, that in my opinion, it's not the best Sugiura match from last year, but it is probably the best example of putting the guy over. I mean, it does show the effort that Takayama can still put in. I think he bled hard way from his own headbutt in this one. That's how much he put into this. Takayama does what you would expect him to do. He throws his weight around, and it means much, much more because he's in there with Sugiura, the mini heavyweight, who might be short, but he can find a way to win this match by just being absolutely vicious. And it was vicious. It was a wonderful display of ugly violence. So that's all I can say about it. Check it out, get past that crowd, and you'll see something truly, truly epic, I would say. Number 8, I have a 6-man tag from 2008 in Noah, yet again. Takayama teaming with Sano, Takuma, and Aoki Atsushi versus Kobashi, Kenta, Honda, Tamon, and Kenta. Here I feel compelled to mention that I'm not making a list of the best matches that just happen to have Takayama in them. I'm making a list of his best performances. You know, otherwise a match like Kobashi's 2007 return to Noah would be on here. That was a tag match where he teamed with Takayama against Misawa and Akiyama. But Takayama was the most inconsequential performer in that match, so it doesn't really belong on this list. The tag matches that are on here feature notable contributions from Takayama. In this case, Takayama is basically the leader of his team. Sano was fairly inconsequential in this one, as is Honda and Aoki. Aoki gets bullied by the heavyweights on the opposing team in the same way that Kenta does. So in this match you get Takayama versus Kenta interactions, which are always just so much fun. And you get heavyweight action between Takayama and Kobashi, obviously. Kobashi being the leader of the opposing team. It's all really well put together to create an exciting multi-man tag where you get the interactions you would expect with the dynamics going on. Can't really say much more. It's well worth checking out, I'd say. Number 8 on this list. In 7th place, I have Takayama versus Misawa Mitsuharu from Noah once again. This is from the 15th of April 2001. This was actually the final of a tournament to crown the first ever GHC heavyweight champion. Both of their Noah matches are on this list, and there's a healthy difference, I think, between the two of them. This one incorporates Takayama's size quite a bit more. You know, Misawa is forced to use more submissions just to get out of a desperate need to escape. He has to use more submissions. There's still a heavy focus on striking, as you would expect, and the technique is always good, so which is definitely fun to watch. It's just not as equal a battle as their 2002 match is, which we will get to later. You know, Takayama just gets placed in a much more dominant role in this one. You know, it doesn't necessarily make the match better than 2002. It just makes it different in a good way, which is definitely something you look for when you're looking at these the same match, but the same guys in different matches. That's what you're looking for. The 6th best match in Takayama's career for me is versus Sasaki Kensuke in the 2004 G1 Climax. This is a very appropriate follow-up to the match they had in the 2002 tournament, which had a higher focus on striking. This one had a more epic aesthetic to it. More big moves, but spaced out, sold well, and they were all teased well for the most part. You know, the right amount of near falls. It just, a lot of excitement over who was going to win. You know, it feels like a very complete match. It lacks the innovation to get into the top 5. It's just simple ideas done very well, which is a lot what you can ask for. But the top 5 have that extra bit of spark to them. This one just kind of lacked that. But it's definitely, I'd say it's fast paced enough for everyone to enjoy, no matter what your taste is. Whereas many of these are matters of taste. This one, I think, could have broad appeal if you watch it. So I'll just say that about it. Number 6, Takayama versus Kensuke. Now to get into the top 5. These are the top 5, the big ones. Starting with Takayama versus Nishimura Osamu from New Japan Pro Wrestling. Semi-final of the 2002 G1 Climax. You know, earlier on with Takayama versus Misawa from 2001, I mentioned Misawa's submissions and how he used them to escape. Well, this match uses that idea and just executes it that much better. That's all I can say. You know, Nishimura is a mat-based guy, and he forces Takayama to work the mat as well. You know, obviously Takayama's size gives him the advantageous position there more often than not, but Nishimura is just awesome at escaping submissions and getting back on equal footing. It's just so, so well done. You know, Takayama is basically bringing the drama and substance to the mat-based exhibition that Nishimura likes to do. And it's done brilliantly. It's absolutely brilliant, I'd say. It's an excellent clash of styles. The thing that holds me back from giving this even more praise, it can be hard to invest in the winner at times, you know, because it's such an evenly matched contest for such a long time. You know, there's definitely some drama towards the finish, but I just would have liked just more extensive control segments to put either guy in a more perilous position. This one kind of felt like neither one was never ever in real danger of losing here. You know, that's the further we got to the finish, I would have liked to see more danger. That's just that might be just a matter of taste as far as mat work is concerned. But that's only one thing holding the match back from being even higher up. It's absolutely excellent, though, I'd say. Definitely well worth checking out. Then we're going back to Noah, where we have the second Takayama-Misawa match, again for the GHC Heavyweight Championship. I mentioned this was a more equal contest in the 2001 version, and it's because it's because of the stiffness of the whole affair. You know, they take no precautions here. They hit as hard as they can. And, you know, Misawa hits just as hard, if not harder, than his opponent, so he's more in control than he was last time. And the result is just, it feels like a horror movie, it really does. I mean, they work, this probably went longer than you'd expect a match of its type would go, a big slugfest like this, but it worked. It just gave you more time to come to terms with the fact that they were going through hell here. You know, it's a battle of endurance, but it's not like Kobashi versus Kensuke, where the impression that you get is that they're both winning the battle of endurance. This one, they felt like they were both losing, and it becomes a question of, you know, who can survive the longest. That sounds a bit can that turn out well, but it did turn out well. I think, in my opinion, it definitely did. That is number 4, Takayama versus Misawa, 2002. Number 3 will be the 2004 version of Takayama vs Kenta. Very interesting to compare this one to the match they had this year. This one gets the nod simply because it just did more to put Kenta over. You know, wasting no time with Kenta just kicking away Takayama's handshake. The grappling's really intense. It just feels like, you know, Takayama just traps Kenta in his grip, and Kenta just sells the effects of all Takayama's offense to perfection. I mean, when Takayama teases the Everest German and then just drops Kenta face first, you know, I can't imagine anyone who wouldn't feel sorry for Kenta after that. You know, Kenta, of course, gets his moment in the sun, and some of his offense is pretty believable because Takayama just makes it so with his selling. So it might be the best big man versus little man match of all time. I don't want to make such a big claim without being absolutely sure of that, but it would definitely be up there, I'd say. Number 3 on this list, Takayama vs Kenta, 2004. And number 2, we have Takayama challenging the almighty Kobashi Kenta for the GHC Heavyweight Championship in 2004. This features probably Takayama's finest beatdown. He absolutely demolishes Kobashi's arm and brings him closer to the point of losing that precious championship than many others did. You know, Kobashi's selling is on point, and there's so much heart and spirit behind it that you think his body is just breaking down before your eyes. It really does, which just contributes to an amazing atmosphere up for this match. And it has one of the most memorable endings to a match you're ever going to see. You know, Kobashi goes for the burning hammer, he isn't able to pull it off with the bad arm, and he does something else. Something else. If you haven't watched the match, then you don't need me telling you how this match ends. It's something else, but it's out of this world how the match ends. All I can say is watch it. I originally had this at 5 stars, but when I watched the match I have at number 1 on this list and realised how much more I enjoyed that one, I had to keep things in perspective. So that should tell you something about the match I'm about to talk about, which is Takayama Yoshihiro versus Nagata Yuji from New Japan Pro Wrestling on May the 2nd, 2002. I watched this match a few weeks ago for the first time, and it became one of my favourite matches of all time. There's a phrase that gets used sometimes to describe a match: they made every move count. And normally that means the match felt really meaningful. It doesn't literally mean that every move was important, but in this match it does literally mean that. It absolutely does. At the very least, it's as close as you can get. You know, from the early mat work, you can get the message that these two are equals, that Nagata isn't an underdog by default because he's just slightly smaller. Takayama has to work to get him in that position, and he does it absolutely perfectly, and Nagata sells it absolutely perfectly. There's a transition here where Takayama teases for the Everest German, and the way Nagata counters it is just out of this world, and all of Takayama's knees are just so perfectly timed. You figure they had to have planned such a perfectly timed match out over and over and again, but this does not feel choreographed at all, not at all. So I don't know how they pulled this off. It's just the punishment Nagata takes is unreal. More and more of that until Nagata summons up the will to go on, and they go back and forth. Some of the most meaningful back and forth I've ever seen. The atmosphere in this one is absolutely incredible. The dome might be a big crowd, but sometimes it can be quiet. The crowd was electric for this one. It was absolutely electric. It felt like the most important result you can imagine. This became one of my favorite matches of all time when I watched it. I think it can be the same for others. I really do. So check it out. Check all this stuff out. Some of it is on YouTube. You can always send me a personal message for links if you want them. And again, I haven't started a new list for someone else yet, so anyone with any preferences for who the subject of the next one should be should just let me know. Sayonara.